Today's guest, Constanze Buchheim.
Instead of preparing for this complexity and instead of preparing for this collaboration need and things like that, leaders at the moment build comfort zones. So
how does a comfort zone look like?
How does a comfort zone look like? I'm putting together leadership teams, and I'm not focusing on how they can challenge us and how they can be uncomfortable and say their mind and have a real discussion culture. But I'm recruiting yes-sayers.
Yeah, okay, I understand.
Yes-sayers, and I'm not implementing feedback structures because I'm saying, oh, see, we're in a crisis. We have to act quick. We don't have a lot of time for integrating other opinions or feedback or whatever. We're doing what I'm saying. And then they're adding a lot of people around them who say, yes, he or she is right. And they think, of course, speed is important. Yeah. But if you're running with speed into the wrong direction, because you did not hear all those other opinions, that's a threat.
Constanze and I talked about executives, on hiring them, but also the different types of leadership styles you see when an organization is growing from an early stage to a growth stage to a more established stage, and also what types of leadership styles are common in these areas, and also from different company types, how they can differ and how you can transition. We also talked about mistakes that Constanze saw in executive search and also leadership teams on how they can collaborate better, and what are the top patterns of leaders that are relevant for the future and what we need more of. So I think it's a very interesting and insightful episode for everybody who is touch basing or is interested in working with executives, being an executives, or hiring executives.
Then you can build trust, and then you can spend less time communicating and more time just getting shit done.
Then I went home and thought about this sentence.
We basically put it on the table.
Hiring takes time. People are trained.
How to objectively judge certain situations.
It's very, 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 very hard to change things.
That was the learning.
Entrepreneurs with empathy.
To the people side.
Hi Constanze, happy to interview you today. So I have a book in front of me. When the fit is right, magic happens. That's a quote from Chris O'Neill, CEO Evernote, in your company notebook. What's the context behind that?
Oh, I love that. I love that quote. So I'm a firm believer of the idea that recruiting and leadership is pretty much linked. And if you manage to really define yourself as a leader, your company, and what it's all about, and you're able to translate that into recruiting and to connect the dots of those criteria to your leadership principles, then you're creating a system of people who work, but while working, they're realizing what's important for them. So you'll have a really magical system, because by intention and by inner motivation, people will do what is best for them and the company. And if we manage it, to integrate it in our definitions for society as well.
And how would you define fit?
Fit is match. So basically, your inner values, your principles match the principles of the organization, and the principle the organization came up with again should be linked to what's the value we create on the market. So if your values match the values of the company, and the values of the company match the value that you create on the market for those who pay for your products or services, then you have an alignment that helps you to neglect a lot of rules. And this is what I love about the Netflix culture. They came up with 2 books that I loved, and I've really much linked to this concept. and one of them is no rules roots. And they say you can neglect rules if you build a really consistent system.
And how does this then work? Because people think independent and know by principle what the decision-making framework or style would be, and then you trust in the people that they make the right decisions, or what's behind that?
What's behind that is, above all, reflection. Everything starts with reflection and clarity, and then communication. So once you realized what really is important, and a lot of companies don't invest that time. They just do, and they just act, and they're not reflecting it. If you're reflecting it, if you have clarity, and if you're able to translate this into communication and into all your leadership systems, for example, what's an example? So, from our perspective, we're an executive search company. We are a modern executive search company, and we define ourselves as partners who enable the companies we work for to move into the future. To be able to move into the future, we have to change things that we did so far, and we have to leave our comfort zone, and we have to face the brutal facts. So for us, it's an important behavior that we're really, really, really honest, like really fully honest. And what we did then is to translate the behavior that we have and the success factor that we have, being really honest, to move those companies forward and those leaders we are working with forward. We integrated that into our leadership principles and into our core principles. In German, it's 100%ige Aufrichtigkeit. In English, I guess it's 100% honesty and authenticity, hard word, authenticity.
Yes.
We're communicating this, and we're trying to create stories and telling those stories, and we're integrating this into our recruiting. So once we're having interviews, one thing that we assess is how authentic someone is, how honest someone is.
How do you measure authenticity?
That's a good question. It's asking a tough question, and like a question that's somehow a little bit vulnerable, or like asks you to become a little bit vulnerable. For example, like we don't ask it, but it's a well-known example. So if you're asking for someone's weaknesses, that's a question that would open some vulnerability. And if someone is giving you a book answer like, I'm not so good in sports, and you have someone in front of you who's obviously good in sports, that's not a good answer. But if someone's sitting there and saying, I have that problem that when it's getting really, 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 really tough, and we have tensions in the relationships, I start to procrastinate because I'm afraid of those tensions, and I'm really working hard on it. I'm reflecting on it. And this is what I did so far. I'm like, okay, wow, that's an answer.
And what if somebody has no weaknesses? No, I'm joking.
Well, you have those answers as well, right? Yes. If someone has no weaknesses, there's obviously no reflection, or not too much reflection, or not the ability to share. And I mean, it's not the question that you share everything. It's just this finding the right portion of being your true self. I think that's so important for enabling the future and working in modern leadership cultures as an employee, but also as a leader. So that's really, really important for us. And just to make it short, like make the link, this is how we connected. So translate what's important for you in all your actions and all your systems. That could prolong this, like feedback rules, things like that. Just be consistent in what you do.
And therefore you need to define it upfront very clearly, as you said, right?
Exactly.
And everybody, also every manager needs to know exactly what is expected, but also every employee, because otherwise how can you
Exactly.
streamline it? Yeah?
Exactly. And that's why we are, for example, doing an onboarding, a cultural onboarding. So if someone joins iPotentials, then we're doing cultural onboarding to be really explicit about the implicit, as I say it. So the more you're able to make the implicit explicit, the faster someone is able to join, to really onboard, to make sure we are all on the right spot, because that's a part of the onboarding. Finding out if you're right.
What are some mistakes you found, maybe patterns that companies make when evaluating or looking for a fit?
Yeah.
It's not so easy, right, to build that systematic approach in evaluating somebody for a certain profile or competencies or whatever you look for.
It's not so easy. So what's done wrong in most of the cases is pretty much linked to what I already said. So if you want to find the best candidate, an excellent candidate for the position, we see a lot of companies who think there's a broad definition of excellent. Yeah, so a person is good or is not good. But the truth is that excellent recruiting means that you understand yourself as a company and that you're able to define excellence for your company, because what's excellent for your company might not be excellent for my company.
Yes.
And most people don't get it, and they don't define excellence with regard to their situation in terms of what's their strategy, what's their stage they're in, what's their business model, what's their success factors. And all those things have to define a kind of persona that you're looking for. And if you're having this basis as a company, you're way better in recruiting. And if then you're really thinking about, okay, what's the task and what's the competencies we additionally need to all those things that I just said. Yeah. And you're coming up with a profile that's not only targeting on abilities and competencies, like general competencies, but you're like really able to define specific competencies needed for the role, specific personality traits that are needed for the role, specific attitude points, that are needed to fit into the culture. Then you're able to go out and hunt. Yeah. And this is that's the second mistake. Most people wait for the perfect candidate to apply, and they include mistake one. They even don't know who's the perfect candidate. Yeah,
but how do you get to that point that you are really that you can say, okay, I put in the proof of work that I really know that this type of candidate is the right one for a certain defined profile? And how also you said how we define the profile, but also how then you really make sure that also all the participants are calibrated in the right way, because usually interviewing is also meeting many people, let's say maybe 5 to 9 sometimes even. And if in the beginning with the main stakeholders, you are aligned, but then the other 60% of the panel, they are not aligned, then you have another problem, right? Because then you again maybe have a good profile that fits, but you don't get it through because
that would have been my third mistake.
Okay.
I would say, but let's start with it. It's missing alignment. Missing alignment of all those who are involved in the interview process, and this also starts with a lot of companies don't have management principles, so they are not translating their culture and what's important from a principle perspective into management principles in terms of what do I expect from a leader in this company, what needs to be multiplied. Yeah, that's the general alignment. I don't see a lot of companies who do that, which is a hard mistake because your leaders are your multipliers. if you do it right, if you align. If you don't align them, they're the one who come up with separate systems.
Yeah.
So
everybody brings their own style.
Yeah, everybody brings their own style, and the same is true on the deeper level in an interview. Yeah, so people don't start with the definition of the process, how the process of hiring someone will look like and who will be involved. So if they don't have this process right, they cannot set up the definition of the profile right, because if they start thinking about who will be involved 6 weeks after the process started, new parts of the definition come up because new ideas come up and things like that. So what we do in executive searches is when we do our briefing, for example, is that we're saying who will be involved in this process. And we are speaking to each and every person who will have a veto in the process. And with all the thoughts, we're coming up with a profile, and then we ask everyone, is this in line? Are we aligned? Are we clear about the profile? And if that's not clear, we don't start.
That's good.
Yeah.
In case you like my show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And it sounds so simple that this actually makes sense, but it's so hard to achieve in reality because you work with top executives. They don't have time even for internal important things. And then why should they then spend time with somebody they just know on a profile that is not even ready to interview, to just have 1 or 2 hours of a conversation, right? So how do you make sure that you also get the time with them and then spend it right?
People want to be heard. So people want to have a say. If you're signaling them, hey, you are important in this process, you will have a veto in this process. Therefore, you will have a responsibility in this process. And I'm asking you to take on this responsibility and spend 30 or 45 minutes with us. You will get leaders to step in. Plus, the best leaders understand that with the best hiring, you're helping yourself the most. So it's a question of opportunity costs. Yeah, imagine we are hiring someone, or we are not able to hire someone because we are not aligned. Yeah, opportunity costs go up and up and up and up as long as the position is not filled. And if we don't find the right candidate and we have the wrong candidate, every good leader knows how much time goes into a person that's not a fit. So if you have an experienced leader, they will step in. They will step in, and they're really happy to contribute. If we're having very unexperienced leaders, which sometimes happens if we're working with scale-ups, then we're telling them what's going to happen, and we're telling them why we need it. And if there's still no willingness to spend some time, we are stopping the search. We're not doing the search.
Yeah, it totally makes sense, because then it's also in a contract, right? You have duties and you also have some rights. So if they don't stick to the duties, then they also don't get the rights.
Well, and it's a sign for the process. Yeah. So if you're not willing to invest like 30 minutes or 45 minutes into making your partner smart, then we will have the same problems throughout the process. We will not have the speed in the process that we need and things like that. So that's not going to work, because we're working with excellent candidates who expect a quick and decisive process. And if we already have the problem in the beginning, then it's not going to work.
And what we did not do, can you also give us a bit context about yourself? Because I think you have also a very relevant background that also the listeners understand where you're coming from, that you can judge certain things in a certain way.
Sure. So I started my career in a fast-growing startup, Spreadshirt, and I was building up the HR department there, and wanted to work with headhunters and executive search boutiques, and had to learn that they did not understand us. It was back in 2006, 2007. And they had no idea. They did not understand the digital functions. They did not understand the structural dynamics. They did not understand the culture that we needed in those really early days. And at the same time, I was at the core of the back then a rising startup scene and met a lot of founders, and they all had the same problems. And then in 2009, I said, okay, I found my own company, iPotentials, as an executive search boutique focusing on finding leaders for companies who are really going into the future. Yeah. So in the beginning, that meant working with startups and finding really entrepreneurial, digital thinking people, really generalistic, to be able to build up in seed stages. We worked with a lot of startups back then, like Delivery Hero and My Muesli, and a lot of really cool places. And then back in 2013, 2014, the German corporates came to Berlin because they realized they had to innovate. And they said, okay, we need people who are able to write on a white sheet of paper as well. Who do you work with? And all the startups, because we were well positioned there, said iPotentials. So that was a really fast move then, because right ahead we started working with small, medium-sized, older German companies, family companies, and also like huge corporations like DAX companies. Yeah, because they all had this problem that they were in a transformation as well. Not as we had known it in the scale-up growth situation, but they had this innovation problem. Yeah, so they needed the same kind of people who understand new business models, new leadership cultures, but still are able to manage a growing company or transforming company. Sorry, and we worked there and placed leaders there as well. And meanwhile, we're a well-placed, positioned executive search boutique for this very special type of leader who's able to lead a company into the future, and build really customer-centric, employee-centric, but also sustainable companies. And we are a team of 25 people based here in Berlin. To 60% we're working in the late stages, meanwhile, and 40% we're in the scale-up stages, because the real early stages are not good.
Yeah, they cannot afford you.
They cannot afford us, and it's not so good to hire an external leader in this very early stage. And
what's the threshold for you, scale up versus late stage? How do you define it?
So scale up is the situation where you secured finances to multiply your proof of concept that you came up with. Yeah. And later stage is the situation when you did this for years and years and years and came up with structures, and you need to redefine yourself again and question yourself: is the product, is the service that we're offering still the right? Do we have to change? And that's the stage part.
And what would you say would differentiate executive teams of maybe startups or scale-ups than maybe later stage companies, and also the maybe classical German Mittelstand or corporates?
I have an answer. So that maybe to help you understand, it's important to add some more things before, because what I realized when we started working a lot for those older companies, I said, okay, we need to stay connected with the startup economy, because we bring innovation to the old economy by leadership. And as this was not really possible with iPotentials, because we were focusing on later stages, I started becoming an investor and like shareholder and advisory board for those younger companies. I work a lot with them. I'm speaking a lot. I'm giving a lot of speeches, and therefore in connection with a lot of startups to stay connected with them. And I'm also trying to work in the ecosystem. So I'm in the supervisory board of a business school to talk about what future leadership needs, and also trying to create an ecosystem that's sustainable in terms of balanced power, which is the reason why I'm consulting the German government as well in those topics. And by doing this, I saw very typical situations, and very typical leadership styles that are linked to your use case. And those use cases are pretty much linked to the stages a company is in. And we work with a model. You can look up for that. It's called Greiner model, which shows different stages a company is in and the leadership crises you get in while moving through those stages. Yeah? And so there's this really early stage, then there's scale. If you manage to come to scale, then you have things like professionalization because you're in an IPO, things like that. And then at some point you're getting this really mature situation. And in each of these situations, you need a different leadership style. And that's the mindfuck for leaders, because what brought you to a certain situation will stop the future growth, which is really, really, really hard to get. For example, in the very early stage of a company, and this is what's typical for the seed stage, the early stage, you need relationships. You need a relational leadership style, and people connect via relations.
Within the company, also
within
to the outside?
Both, yeah. Everything happens via relations. So you get referrals for employees via relations. You get everything happens via relation, because it's all about trust, and trust flows in relationships. And you need this trust because you don't have a brand. So you need a replacement, a trust replacement. This is relationships. So your leadership style will be relationship driven, which means, okay, it's so important that you're here. And as I want you to be here in this company, we're kind of building the company around you. So we're really like in deep interaction. And this is what we learn as startup founders or as founders. We really learn that relational leadership style. And at some point when your company grows, your team grows, it's not possible anymore to manage those relationships and not.
When does this start? At what company size? At around 50 to 100 people, something like this?
It's around 30 and upgoing. It somehow works for 30, but 50 really is the end. And that's the latest point where you have to shift from relationship driven leadership style to a structure driven leadership style.
This is also where a lot of companies fail. The first executive team or leadership team they hire, it's usually not working.
Exactly. And it's such a hard culture shift. Because at that point, in the beginning, it's really like, okay, you are so important and our relationship is so important. We'll manage to do everything. And the step to this professionalization and structure-led leadership style is, okay, it's most interesting and most relevant what's in the interest of the organization, not of the individual. So the interest of the organization gets more important for some time than building around an individual. And people hate that, of course. And
you're not special anymore.
And this is why they're then saying, oh, culture has changed, what's happening here, it's not good anymore. The point is, it might be not good anymore for them as an individual, but it's necessary for the organization, because an organization is a number of many individuals, and we cannot build strong organizations that are built on individual interests.
Yes. And also not looking into the past or the present. You need to always anticipate the future.
Exactly. And here's the point. Most family businesses don't manage to leave this relationship-driven style because they're built on family structures. And as you're in a family and you cannot leave your family members. You're connected if you...
It's also hard maybe to separate from a family member.
This is somehow in the culture, and it's so hard for family businesses to do that shift. And as I see a lot of companies like 100 years, 110 years, 150 years, and they're still in this relationship-driven style.
It can also be an asset, can't it?
It can be an asset if you bring this to the value perspective and you're able to integrate the action or like acting in the interest of the company and those values. But if those values are the only decision-making power, it will be a limit.
Yeah.
It will be a limit. Yeah. It will be a limit for innovation, because if people don't want to change and you don't want to separate, then you're stuck. Yeah. And I see that so often. Yeah. So that's the situation and the leadership style I see most family businesses in. And the leadership style most corporates are in is obviously the structure-based leadership style.
Even maybe too admin heavy sometimes.
So yeah, they made it. They made the shift from relationship-driven to structure, but then structure gets its own aim. Yeah? And they don't manage to come to the next level, and the next level would be result-driven in addition to result-driven, if you're like focusing on the result, you can give some free space.
Yeah, and you can work with principles then, right?
Exactly, and create some room for trust. But if you're not result-driven, but process-driven, you will not be able to make the change. And this is what we see. So family business in this relationship-driven, corporates in those structure-driven, a lot of startups linked in this result-driven leadership style. And the point is, not one of them is the perfect one, because the world is changing, so leadership style has to develop as well.
Yeah.
So whenever you stick into one of those and you're not developing your personality as a leader and therefore your leadership style, there will be a point of time when your company will not fit the future anymore.
Yeah. In case you have any feedback or anything you want to share with me, please send me an email on thomas@peoplewise.com or hit me up on LinkedIn. And in case you really enjoy the show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it. When we talk about the future, what are the biggest trends you see for companies in leadership? What they should adapt, that they don't make mistakes or fail?
What? I didn't get the question.
So what are some trends you would see now in leadership that companies should adapt now, that they do not fail to change and transform into the future? Because the world is changing, but maybe we can also first tap into, how do you see is the world changing right now for leaders?
Yeah, world is changing faster and faster and faster. Yeah, and insecurities and threats are going up and up and up and up, which leads to a situation.
Do you think it's currently linked to the economy, to the economic situation, or also to technology, or both? Yeah.
Both. It's economic situation. It's a tech situation. It's a world crisis resource situation.
Yeah.
And so this will not fade. Yeah. Again, it's there, and it will stay. And this leads to the situation that we have really complex decisions. Yeah, we're living in this VUCA world, very volatile, insecure, complex, which leads to a situation that you as a leader are not able to work in a linear way any longer. What was possible some years ago, but it is not anymore. So in order to cope with complexity, you as a person in your own personal development need to be able to manage complexity, which means coping with diverse developments, coping with diverse opinions, finding solutions in those very different situations, creating collaboration in those silos, because the next level is not efficiency. The next level is value creation. Value creation is only possible if you connect the dots. Connecting the dots is only possible with collaboration.
So it's a way more holistic approach.
Yeah, it's a way more holistic approach and way more complex. And you really need, in order to address that complexity, you need to understand how people work. Yeah, and therefore you need to understand how emotions work. And you need to integrate those emotions into your communication to be able to manage this really complex setting and still move the organization forward. And what we see there at the moment, the trends that we see is that instead of preparing for this complexity and instead of preparing for this collaboration need and things like that, leaders at the moment build comfort zones. So
how does a comfort zone look like?
How does a comfort zone look like? I'm putting together leadership teams, and I'm not focusing on how they can challenge us and how they can be uncomfortable and say their mind and have a real discussion culture. But I'm recruiting yes-sayers.
Yeah, okay, I understand.
Yes-sayers, and I'm not implementing feedback structures because I'm saying, oh, see, we're in a crisis, we have to act quick. We don't have a lot of time for integrating other opinions or feedback or whatever. We're doing what I'm saying. And then they're adding a lot of people around them who say, yes, he or she is right. And they think, of course, speed is important. Yeah. But if you're running with speed into the wrong direction, because you did not hear all those other opinions, that's a threat. So it would be really, really, really helpful to build a really diverse team. And if I'm talking about diversity, I'm not only talking about men and women. I'm talking about true diversity in terms of different opinions, how we work, different opinions, different cultures, different
personalities,
different personalities. This is diversity, and this is needed because we need different opinions and different perspectives how we analyze what's happening in the world. And then in the top of the leadership team, we need someone who is able to integrate, get those opinions, communicate with every one of them, and integrate those into a clear vision, and then again coming back, bringing this clear vision with a strong communication, emotional and storytelling communication back into the team. And that's what we really need. So it's kind of easy to say we are not hiring those who are really comfortable in the teams. We should be hiring those who add new competencies. We should be hiring those who add new personality traits, and we should add people who are what's the English word, fitting to our culture, but not a copy of ourselves. And we should come up with creating discussion cultures. We should educate our team members to learn how to discuss. This is what you see in social media. People are not trained in discussing anymore. If there is another opinion, people are against it. And then waves go up. And because we're not trained in accepting other points of view and finding a way in discussing it. The other thing is implementing feedback mechanisms. So most leadership teams I see that are not ready for the future did not implement feedback systems. They said, well, I don't want feedback because feedback is uncomfortable. I don't like it if someone does not like what I put my passion in. So they're stopping to listen to people. And then they're
Instead of translating it in the right
instead
way.
of translating it, instead of saying thank you for the input, at some point of view, they're losing connection to the world. And we see some strong narcissistic tendencies in very powerful people, where you can see that this power led to a situation where those people had disconnected with the world and even get what's happening there. I think Elon Musk is a strong example for that.
Yeah, and I think these people also have a lot of insecurities that they don't want to face the reality at a certain point, right? And that's dangerous.
And that's dangerous. And the point is that a lot of those people go to the top because they have the power to create those comfort zones again. And that's really, it's so conflicting with which we already need and will need. And I see that the most innovative companies, those who are like really adapted and adaptable, they have those mechanisms and they are able to face the brutal facts. And you can even see it in their supervisory boards. So in Germany, we see a lot of supervisory boards who are recruited not based on a profile, not based on how do we get challengers for our situation. They're recruited on relationships again, and in terms of trust. Will this person will be a threat for me or not? And therefore, we are building comfort zones in our supervisory boards as well, who should be challenging us. And if I'm building comfort zones everywhere, I'm starting to build a bubble that is saying me, everything is correct. You're doing everything correct. You are correct. I'm missing to get the right data points to be able to build the future.
Super interesting. Some recommendations. So what is a guest that I don't know who I should interview next?
Good question. You should talk to Natascha Neumann. She's the founder of Freche Freunde or Erdbeer. Freche Freunde is the brand, Erdbeer. And she really made it to build an organization that's really self-organized. I think that's the next level of leadership, and she made it. She just returned from a world tour, 1 year world tour, which was possible because she was able to build that leadership style in her company.
Yeah, if you can introduce me, I would interview her. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, thank you, Constanze, for your time. It was really insightful. Great episode.
It was a pleasure.